After a while, Rob thought about making a run for it to his grandmother's room. Just then there was a reverse flash of light from it. It was like a shadow covered half the room, sucking in all existing light, and then the shadow pulled back in across the ceiling and the walls and the floor, like a puddle drying quickly on the wall with black tendrils chasing after it. That looked like the bottom of Morticia Adams's dress. The darkness disappeared behind the door. The shadow puddle began coming out from under the door, seeping from the thing on the other side. It was black and inky, and still no light reflected off of it. It began running in rivets down the hallway all at once, and soon the last of it trailed away. After a few more paralyzing moments, Rob figured it was gone and he could run to safety. He tossed the covers back and threw his legs over the side of the bed. Then something was stomping down the hallway toward the room. It stopped and stared and stood in the doorway. That one was like how he remembered them, although this one seemed a bit shorter and stockier. The main difference, though, was the color. That one was white, a dirty off-white. Rob was stunned, half sitting up on the bed. It leaned forward at the waist and grabbed the doorknob and pulled the door almost shut. It left it open an inch or two. Rob stayed there, motionless on the bed. It was obvious for some reason that the first one was gone. But what about that other one? Was it just outside? Would the big black one come back? Were there more? He started to get up to run, but he saw that pale hand grab the outside knob and it pushed the door open, never letting go. It just stood there looking at Rob, who was still as a statue, and then it pulled the door back where it was, only open a crack. A minute later, Rob got the urge to bolt again. Again, there were the same results. The third time he got up the nerve, he told himself just to run and run and run. He was at the door in a blink and he flung it open. He didn't wait to look and see if anything was out there. He burst into his grandmother's room. She immediately sat up in bed, startled awake. He was yelling over and over that they were here again, they were here again. She asked who was here, and he said that the monsters were back. She yelled at him that nothing was there, and that he had to go back to bed. He said no. She ripped the covers off herself, got out of bed, grabbed his upper arm, and yanked him back into the guest room. She told him to stay put and not make another sound. He was terrified, but he knew arguing was pointless. She was a bigger child than he was. He just made quick grunts of desperation. She shut the door behind her. He quickly turned on the lamp. She must have seen the light spill out from under the door, and she walked back in and yanked the lamp plug out of the wall. She wrapped the lamp up in its own cord and then exited the room with it. He spent the rest of the night on the bed with his knees drawn up under his chin. "Jesus, what a bitch," Sue exclaimed. Rob laughed. "Yeah, the people in my life were way worse than those things, I suppose. Don't worry, though. She took her bitchiness with her to the grave." They both smiled, vindicated. "I swear to you, Sue, it's true. It really happened. I know I wasn't dreaming that time." "I believe you," she said. "Really?" "Yes. I know plenty of people who've had unexplainable things happen to them. They've just never happened to me. My girlfriend, this girl at work, just recently moved out of her parents' place because she was able to rent a guest house for dirt cheap. She brought her dog with her, and when she got him there, he just went nuts. She said he was barking ferociously at nothing, and he couldn't even stand to be in the yard, so she took him back to live at home. She was pretty bummed about it. Then one night she was watching TV, and the picture went out. It went to static. She said she saw people walking around in the static, and it weirded her out. She got up to turn on a light when... You know how when a room is dark, your eyes see all those little splotches like everything is staticky? He nodded. Like old film grain. Exactly. Well, she said all those static splotches came together and formed a staticky-looking man. She said there was no more static anywhere else in the air anymore. It had all become him. He was near the doorway, so she shut her eyes and just ran for the door right through him. When she did it, she said she felt that coldness that people talk about, but it was all prickly. She ran outside and across the street, and when she turned around, she said her vision played a trick on her. It looked like the guest house was getting larger, like it was moving toward her, coming for her. Just then the garage door of the main house opened, and she screamed. Her neighbor drove by right then and saw her standing in the ditch across the street from her house, screaming at it. She was so embarrassed. Of course, when she looked up from her neighbor, everything looked normal again, except the garage door was still open and no one else was home to have opened it. Are you sure she wasn't on something? She swears it happened. Here's the cliche but creepy part. It turns out the previous tenant got really sick and died in that living room. I believe her, though. She's actually staying with me now. Oh, he said with surprise. And when she told me, she looked pretty upset, but She didn't turn nearly as pale as you did telling me your experience. I did not. Yes, you did. I believe you, Rob. Good. Thanks. Has anything else happened since? Just weird, unrelated things here and there. I think I got so scared for so long that night, though, it kind of messed up my heart, like it got stretched out at the target rate for too long. Sometimes I get this pain. He put his fist to the middle of his chest. Man, she said. It's not that bad, he added when she looked worried. Their conversation turned to lighter, sillier topics that they could only share with each other. Then they began to say their good nights. Rob was feeling exhausted. As he was walking Sue to the door, she said, You gonna be okay? I think so. I'm just really beat. Good. Then she tacked on, you should get some rest. Oh, I will. Call me anytime for anything, got it? All right, thanks. I mean it. Everything is going to be okay. Especially if I get my unemployment. Well, let me know how it goes. I will. She was in the hallway and starting to walk away when he said, Sue? Yeah? Thank you. Anytime. She smiled and then she was gone. 10 minutes later, Rob was sound asleep, alone in the bed for the first time in years. Chapter 5. Louise Preston put her beautiful 4-year-old daughter to bed. Her husband was in their room waiting for her. She'd better hurry up. After all, it was Tuesday night. They still tried for extra nights occasionally when they weren't too tired from their day, but they always made sure Tuesday nights were open. She kissed her little blonde and curly-haired Samantha on the forehead and walked over to the light switch and flicked it down. That instantly turned on the nightlight, which was in the shape of a clown's head. It gave off a trapezoidal shaft of light above it, creating looming shadows in the room. How that helped her sleep, Louise didn't know, but it did the job for the most part. She said goodnight to her child and was on her way out when Sammy said, But, Mommy, what if the monsters come? Sweetie, there are no monsters. She loved Sammy to death, but the past few nights had been hell. Sammy would wake up screaming that something was in her room and that it had come out of her closet wall behind her little hanging clothes. Her husband would rush in with her and the room would be in complete disarray. Toys that had been packed in the closet for the night would be scattered toward the bed. Clothes and hangers would be on the floor and Sammy would be in bed just sobbing. It was one hell of a ploy for attention, but Sammy was hardly neglected. If Sammy really believed that it was truly happening, would she need to get her daughter completely unaffordable therapy? Yes, there are, Mommy. No, there aren't. Now look, every time we come in here for you, there's never a monster, now is there? Sammy shook her head slowly. Not then. Right, and not before either. There's just a bunch of toys out where they're not supposed to be, right? Sammy nodded. Now, if there's ever any real problem, Mommy and Daddy are right in the next room. Sammy just stared down at her blanket. Louise sighed. I'll leave your door open and we'll leave ours open and we'll be right here if you need us, okay? No response. Okay? Okay, Sammy said reluctantly. Okay. You're a big girl now and you need to learn to be brave and sleep by yourself. Now go to sleep. You're completely safe. Good night, honey. Night, Mommy. She sounded a little better. Louise went to her room where her husband was waiting. Everything all right in there? He asked, sitting naked on top of the bedspread, reading the newspaper by the lamp on the nightstand. Fine, she said. Good. He threw the paper aside, and she noticed he was half erect. Now come here. She went to him, right after she quietly closed the door and locked it. Sammy heard rumblings and squeezed her eyes shut. The sound grew louder until noisy cracklings signaled the end of the crescendo. If the closet had been on the other side of the room where her parents' wall was, then maybe they would have heard it. They never heard it any of the times before, and Sammy, even at her young age, knew with a sense of premature dread that they would just come from that other side of the room anyway, closet or not. There was silence for a moment. She opened her eyes and the giant purple beast was approaching her. She shut her eyes again, but she could still hear the thudding footsteps as it came closer and closer. She screamed with all her might. For God's sake, Louise exclaimed. She was straddling her husband with the sheet riding halfway up her back. The majority of her feeling was concern, but aggravation was running a close second. She jumped off the bed in her husband and grabbed her robe. Hubby let out an exasperated sigh. This is getting old, he said. I'll take care of it, she said, rushing out of the room. He lay there and interlaced his fingers behind his head and leaned back against the headboard. Sammy must really be getting worked up, he thought, as she let out another gurgling bellow. The first time your child does that, you are terrified, but he was starting to lose it with the girl who cried wolf. Then he heard his wife scream. "No, let go, let go!" Louise was screaming. He leapt out of bed. The screaming had stopped. He looked around quickly for a weapon. He didn't see anything of use, so he just ran for it. He heard a shuffling and whooshing sound and then quiet as he ran down the short hallway towards his little girl's room. He was there in less than 2 seconds. Sammy's bed was empty. "Sammy? Louise? Where are you? What's going on?" He was frantic. He then saw his wife's legs protruding from the closet, toes down. He flicked on the overhead light. "Louise! Oh, God, no!" He ran up to her. Her robe was loosely draped around her. Her left cheek was pressed against the back wall of the closet. She was staring blankly. Her mouth was drooling blood, which was soaking into the flannel crisscrosses on her robe's collar. Her right arm was bent backwards at the elbow in a way it should never bend. Her left arm was propped up on the wall. The bloody left handprint started 3 feet above her and was streaked down to where her hand lay limp. He stared at her for almost a full minute before the real screams came.